I am PLO Lumumba here at the Swara Acacia Conservancy in Machakos County in the Republic of Kenya. We continue with our conversations about the continent of Africa and some prominent post-colonial leaders in Africa. And today we talk about Gamal Abdel Nasser Hussein. This great man from what is now known as Egypt is unique. Unique in the sense that is considered a pan-Arabist and a pan-Africanist. Gamal Abdel Nasser became prominent in 1952 when he led young military officers to overthrow the administration of King Farouk I. It is instructive that when he led the push, what he did was to allow Mohammed Naguib to be the first president of post-monarchy Egypt. A few years later, in 1954, he became Egypt's second president after overthrowing the administration of Mohammed Naguib. And that is when Gamal Abdel Nasser becomes unique. Unique in the sense, if we backpedal a little, that when he overthrew King Farouk, individuals within his rank, such as the third president of Egypt, Anwar al-Sadat, had wanted that Farouk be executed, but Nasser said no. He said, let us allow him to go into exile. And therefore, when he succeeds Naguib, he's already established himself as a unique individual, and his uniqueness is in the desire to create an Egypt which is different. And he names Egypt the United Arab Republic in his short union with Syria between 1958 and 1961. But a lot of things happened during that period, because Gamal Abdel Nasser has attracted enemies, so that in 1954, there is an attempt to assassinate him by the Muslim Brotherhood, but it does not succeed. And he begins to do things that are unique. Unique in the sense that they are designed to ensure that Egypt, which has hitherto been dominated by the British, regains not only political independence, but also regains economic independence. It is in this context that in 1956, in the month of July, he seizes the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal, up till that point, had been run by an Anglo-French company who were charging the fees for the ships that were passing through the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal was very important because it shortened the journey across to Europe so that ships did not have to use the Cape of Good Hope down in South Africa. And in doing that, Gamal Abdel Nasser establishes himself in the hearts of what is sometimes referred to as the Arab streets. He becomes a pan-Arabist whose agenda is to ensure that the people gain some foothold and become participants in the economic agenda. In 1962, Gamal Abdel Nasser established a universal health care, and that is unique in the entire Arab world. And he does not stop there. He begins to think of how to generate electricity and how to ensure that economic activities are at a different level. It is noteworthy that as early as 1932, there had been a plan to build an iron and steel factory. But that does not happen until Gamal Abdel Nasser enters into an arrangement with the administration of the then Soviet Union and Russia by extension to build Helwan iron and steel factory, which at that time remained the biggest steel factory and iron factory in the entire continent of Africa, and still is the biggest in the continent of Africa. At the same time, Gamal Abdel Nasser enters into an arrangement for the building of one of the biggest hydroelectric dams in the continent of Africa. The design is by the Germans. The Americans say that they are going to help Gamal Abdel Nasser build it, but they don't. And that is when he turns to the Soviet Union, to the Russians, and Aswan High Dam is then built on the River Nile and remained one of the biggest dams in the continent of Africa until very recently, and contributes monumentally to power generation in the land of Egypt. You see, Nasser is unique. Unique in the sense that he believes that the Arabs must unite. And it is instructive that in 1963, a man called Yosef actually makes a movie comparing Nasser with Saladin. And those who know Saladin remember that Saladin was the great conqueror who conquered Jerusalem and resisted the Christian crusaders until the Lionheart Crusade and the Third Crusade. That is when Saladin is defeated. So to compare Nasser with Saladin is to mean that he is a great man. But something happens which dampens the spirit of Gamal Abdel Nasser. And we have to come to it before we go back to his Pan-Africanism. In 1967, during the 7-day war with Israel, the Israelis decimate the entire Egyptian army. Of course, it's then known as the United Arab Republic. And Nasser does not quite appreciate the gravity. At that time, the general is Nasser. It is when Sadat tells him that we cannot win this war because the Israelis are already almost in occupation of Sharm el-Sheikh, that the war is then concluded within 7 days and they surrender, and the Israelis have occupied the Sinai. And he says in his famous speech, in which he says, this is Nazca, this is the great setback. And he resigns, or says that I'm going to resign. And then there are riots across the Arab world, and they are telling him, you cannot resign. You are our leader. And of course, he goes back to office. But before that, something else had happened. Number one, the union between Egypt and Syria collapsed, and the United Arab Republic remains only an Egyptian thing. And before that, in as much as he's talking about pan-Arabism and is in dalliance with the Saudis, in dalliance with the Syrians, in dalliance with the Yemenis with whom he prosecutes and fights a war, he is, on the other hand, also involved in the Pan-African movement. And it is instructive that when he joined the Pan-African movement immediately after Ghana regains independence, and this comes in 1957, when Kwame Nkrumah on the day of independence says that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. Immediately there is a rapport between him and the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. And in the run-up to the meeting in Addis Ababa, there is a meeting, of course, in 1958 in Accra, Ghana. There is a meeting in Casablanca, Morocco in 1960. And Africa, or Black Africa, is divided. They are the former French colonies led by Félix Houphouët-Boigny and others who form the Monrovia Group and the Brazzaville Group and the Casablanca Group, who say that Africa must unite now. And at that time, there is an understanding. There is almost a failure of African unity. And that is when Nasser and Nkrumah and, of course, Haile Selassie then unite. Because Nasser says, we can have a meeting in Cairo in 1963. Nkrumah also says, we can have a meeting, and we can have that meeting in Accra, Ghana. And Haile Selassie comes in and attends a Monrovia meeting. I think the meeting is held in Monrovia, and then the next meeting is then held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And when you talk about the foundation of the Pan-African movement, therefore, you see Nasser there. You see Nkrumah there. You see Haile Selassie there. You see Hamed Sékou Touré there. You see Nyerere there. And that is how then in 1964, One of the most iconic meetings is then held in Cairo, Egypt, and the host is Gamal Abdel Nasser. Abdel Nasser remains, and there is a sense in which he's a very interesting character. He's brought in the social revolution, the economic revolution. The economy of Egypt is doing very well, but there are also restrictions. He is being accused of being an authoritarian because he does not allow free press. He's being accused of somebody who wants to rule forever, and many things are said about Gamal Abdel Nasser. But he's also ailing, and many of you have read about him. He was one of the heaviest chain smokers that the Arab world has ever seen, as they say. And of course, what happens is that in 1970, Gamal Abdel Nasser suffers a stroke and dies. And when he dies, of course, Anwar al-Sadat takes over, which then begs the question, how do we remember Nasser? We remember Nasser as a pan-Arabist. We remember Nasser as a person who at one time was even being accused of anti-Semitism. And he was being accused of anti-Semitism because after the 7-Day War, he does not stop there. He begins what is normally referred to as the War of Attrition, beginning to fight the Israelis, and whom they called the Zionists, with a view to recapturing the Sinai. And he begins to support Yasser Arafat, Abu Ammar, who then is the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And the whole idea is to liberate Palestine, and of course to ensure that the Israelis don't have any presence in Egyptian territory of what is described as Arab territory. His credentials as a pan-Arabist really cannot be faulted. He is also to be remembered as an economic warrior who was anti-imperialist, and his anti-imperialism is seen in the 1956 seizure of the Suez Canal, when indeed the British and the French do attack Egypt, but they are neutralized, and they are neutralized effectively, and the Suez Canal is then owned by the British. He is to be understood, therefore, as an economic warrior. And of course, the Helwan steel and iron plant, and the Aswan High Dam, and the agrarian revolution that takes place. He's also to be remembered as one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement, together with Tito, Nehru, Nkrumah, and Sukarno. And he's in the forefront of the non-aligned movement. He too is a Pan-Africanist. And when we talk about the founding of the Organization of African Unity, it is instructive that he belonged to the Casablanca group that said independence now. He is also remembered to have brokered the relationship between Nkrumah and his wife Fatia, that on the eve of the independence of Ghana, he sends Fatia to Ghana, and Nkrumah marries her immediately. And indeed, in 1966, when Nkrumah is overthrown, he does offer accommodation for Nkrumah's children, as does Ahmed Sékou Touré to Nkrumah himself. So this is an individual who recognized, and he said it himself, that Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism are not mutually exclusive. They are things that must continue apace, because the spirit is to resist the imperialists. The spirit is to ensure that the African continent, in which Egypt belongs, must be rescued and protected from the diabolical machinations, particularly of the Western world. And that is why Nasser is remembered very fondly. And it is to be remembered that at a time when the administration of Hosni Mubarak was doing very badly, parties emerged which were called the Nasserite parties. That is Gamal Abdel Nasser, a pan-Arabist, a pan-Africanist, and a great man whom history cannot but remember fondly. Gamal Abdel Nasser Hussein. Our discussion on matters Africa continue. There are many issues that deserve attention. So we have covered what we can this day, but we come back again. Goodbye, and see you as we continue the conversation.
The world is changing, and so is Africa's reality. Political shifts, new partnerships, and economic opportunities. And we're here to uncover why and how it's done. What do the billion-dollar IMF loans have to do with the Kenyan unrest? Are US and French troops actually withdrawing from African states after years of presence? Is Europe's so-called green agenda so green and helpful after all? Why are more and more African countries increasing trade with Russia? And how is Britain lending Africa the treasures London looted? Now, from colonial legacies and security to the future of African democracies, we break down the key challenges ahead and analyze the solutions. While the world is watching Africa, tune in with us and question more with RT International on Maisha TV Kenya.
Problem number one is leadership in Africa.
What can we do for Africa? That was a wrong question. The right question was, what can we do with Africa?
What Africa do we want?
Africa had to seek first the political kingdom, and the rest would be given unto them. Unfortunately, we sought and obtained the political kingdom, but there is still a debate as to whether the rest has been given unto us.
Half of our people here are below 20 years old. Yes? Look at the average age of our presidents. It's about 63, 64 years old. We're the only continent in the world where we have presidents at 90 years old, starting new terms. I mean, you guys are crazy or what?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mushabi Jr. on your screen, bringing to you a program called Maisha Talk. This is where we build your capacity to achieve your dreams and visions. One thing I've learned in life is nobody can ever tell you that you can never be anything or achieve anything in this world. Shut them down. You can achieve anything in this world. And in this program, that is what we are talking about. Principles, attitudes, belief systems, where you are going to gain a lot. You're better off than anybody who's not going to watch this program. This is going to change your life. It's big, it's fun, it's educating, it's entertaining. Right here on Maisha Television, where you choose it, you watch it, and you definitely love it.
This keeps me going. On those days when I feel like giving up. Fire.
Do not want the money or properties achieved in a corrupt way.
Badala ya kusaidia watoto wadogo wadogo katika academies za sport, wewe kazi yako imekuwa kila weekend unakuja kwa matanga kutukana viongozi. Wewe ni waziri wa michezo ama waziri wa matanga na masuala za ndani.
Sasa wewe unatuambia nini? This government is going to punish you more than they will punish me.
Tuko na mheshimiwa Eugene, tuko na mheshimiwa Lusaka,
I have no problem. I have full confidence in the agencies that we have to do their job. People are out there bandying my brother yesterday. Me, I've said, if he's guilty, aendelee.
Lakini hata nyinyi mkuwe na mshike rada. Sasa nyinyi wakati ya kufanya kazi mnasema tafuta Ruto, lakini siku ya kupiga kura mnaniambia tipping. Sasa nyinyi kweli mko na plani?
We invite you to like Maisha TV Kenya on all our online media platforms. Facebook at Maisha TV Kenya, Twitter at Maisha TV Kenya, Instagram at Maisha TV Kenya. Maisha TV now invites you to send your feedback or complain because we listen to you. You can now reach us on all our media platforms on Maisha TV. Just send your messages to our social media platforms, call or text us on 0746 999 841 or send us an email to info@maishatv.co.ke. We care. We shall respond to your feedback or complaints within 14 days. Also, keep a copy of messages sent to us. We listen to you. Because you listen and you watch us. Maisha TV. Choose it, watch it, and love it.
I'm Piero Lumumba here at Kibenda Tea Estate in Kiambu County in the Republic of Kenya. Today we look at an interesting subject, interesting in the sense that is happening at a time when Africa, in the minds of many, is at crossroads. Crossroads to mean that Africa must reorganize herself in order to earn economic dividends that she deserves and technological dividends that she needs. What is the place of Russia in the continent of Africa? And it's always important to situate Russia in the context of history, in the context of the Soviet Union, which it belonged to as the Russian Federation, because that is how Russia was introduced to the continent of Africa. While in the 1900s and the early 1900s, the European powers, through different companies, the British through bodies such as the British Imperial Company, the French, the Portuguese, the Italians and the Germans and the Dutch, and of course others were in the continent of Africa initially for purposes of slavery and after slavery colonization, and therefore had their own spheres of influence after the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885. Russia was not present in that space. Russia was not present in that space because she was not a colonizer. She did not have the appetite for colonization that the Western countries had in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century and way up to the 20th century. And we must also remember, therefore, that she did not participate in the neo-colonial project. And it is instructive that after the World War II, when the world was divided between the East and the West, in the words of Winston Churchill, the Iron Curtain had divided the world. That is when one begins to see the interaction between Russia and the continent of Africa, particularly during the periods of decolonization. And one cannot put a line and say this is when it started, but prominently in 1945, when there is the Great Manchester Conference, the Pan-African Conference, that is when we begin to see Pan-African leaders such as Nkrumah and others beginning to talk about having alternative engagements with the continent of Africa and other spaces, because the West, as it is being removed, but they don't want to leave. And Russia then begins to have relationship with a number of African independent fighting movements. African National Congress, founded in 1912, and is led by people like Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, people like Albert Lutuli, and later Sisulu and Mandela and Govan Mbeki. You begin to see the Russian presence in terms of influence at that time. You begin to see once again the presence of Russia with SWAPO in Namibia, and of course Frelimo and MPLA in Angola. And this kind of collaboration then survives even after the colonial project has been decimated. And in the 1960s, there is a very interesting thing that is happening at that time, because Russia is then a part of the Soviet Union. And during the Kennedy administration enters into an arrangement where they are taking young men and women to the United States of America to study. At the same time, what is happening is that the Soviet Union, Russia under the Soviet Union, is also leading another movement of young people to the Eastern Bloc. And the persons who are in the forefront of doing this at that time is Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania, to a limited extent Kwame Nkrumah, and in fact an office is established in Cairo for those who are coming from East Africa, some of whom will give the testimony that they walked from Tanzania and from Kenya and from Uganda up to Cairo, because that is where they would get the passports, and then they were flown to different parts of the Eastern Bloc. There are those who went to Hungary, there are those who went to East Germany, there are those who went to Russia itself, and they form, in a manner of speaking, an army of young men and women, some of whom gained military training. And not only military training, some of them also gained ideological training, because at that time there is the divide between communism or socialism at that time and of course capitalism at that time. And for some reason, Africans were attracted to socialism because it resonated a lot more with African way of life. You only have to read, for example, the works of Mwalimu Nyerere when he writes about Ujamaa in 1967. You can see there is a lot of inclination to the Marxist-Leninist idea of how to govern. When you read the works of individuals such as Apollo Milton Obote with the Common Man's Charter, when you see the ideology of Patrice Emery Lumumba or Kwame Nkrumah or Angola, Agostinho Neto, or Eduardo Mondlane and Samora Moises Machel. So you see a Soviet Union that is in that space and Russia that is prominent in that space, which is what then brings us into this argument now. What is the position of Russia as we speak? As we speak now, interesting things are happening. Once again, the Western powers are very keen on Africa because of our resources. And you can see a revolt. And one of the most recent revolts is in the Sahel, where you see in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and in Mali, and in Chad, and in Guinea, and in Central African Republic. And you see Russia now is beginning to come into that space, and they are offering very interesting things. They are congregating African leaders in Sochi, and they are saying, we are giving you fertilizers for free. So they are addressing agriculture. They are saying you are facing the insurgencies of the Tuaregs in Mali. We are giving you training and arms. We are giving you opportunity to train your young men and women in the area of technology, in engineering, and in those areas. And what one begins to see is an emerging intimate relationship that is defined by an agenda. And once again, I keep on warning my African friends that Russia has defined what they want. Africans must define what they want. That is what will ensure that the relationship is symbiotic. It is not lost on me, for example, that in the energy space, Russia was very present. It was present as early as the 1950s and 1960s. And in Egypt, the Grand Aswan High Dam was actually built by the Soviet Union and the Russians at that time. And it is not lost on me right now that there are negotiations that are going on between Russia and Burkina Faso, between Russia and Niger, to help them develop nuclear energy for peaceful use. That, I think, is important as we go forth in terms of industrialization. And one of the things that is emerging in that regard is that they are prepared to transfer technology. I've already talked about agriculture and the use of and the donation of fertilizer. And the Russian companies are saying that we are prepared to get into that space in fossil fuels and help you reap the dividends so that you can have your own fertilizer. I've already talked about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, particularly in these days of nanotechnology and the Internet of Things and big data. The Russians are saying we are prepared to share with you what we know in terms of artificial intelligence, and you need it for purposes of industrialization. All these factors put together is putting in an African space a Russia that is moving towards becoming a world power, but of a different kind. They are not telling Africans, you must do it this way. They are not telling African countries, this is how you must govern yourself. But they are telling African countries, we are prepared to sit with you at the table of negotiation. We are prepared to offer our technology. We are prepared to work with you. We are prepared to be partners in development. And that, in the English language, is what is sometimes characterized as soft power. So that going forward, and there is an area that I think deserves to be talked about is the area of climate change. Climate change space is a space which recognizes that if we don't deal with the climate in the manner that we ought to, then we are going to suffer in major ways. We are going to suffer in agriculture. We are going to suffer because of lack of provision of water. We are going to suffer in a manner that is going to create hunger in the continent of Africa. And I hear the Russians saying, we are prepared to collaborate with you. You in Egypt, you in Niger, you in Burkina Faso, you in Mali, you in South Africa, if you so desire, to help you to get into the space where we can put up your satellites for you up there so that you can deal with the question of weather, you can deal with the question of mobile telephony, so that you eliminate the hegemony of your former colonizers who, as history has demonstrated, are in the business of reaping where they did not sow. And it is instructive when I talk about the Russian model, because the first vice president of Zambia, Simon Mwansakapwepwe, once said that those who have left as colonizers will once again come back as investors. And we are seeing that in all sectors, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in the mining sector, whether it's in the climate change sector. You can see that the negotiation from the West is that they still want to control, and they want to control in a manner that is to the detriment of the continent of Africa. So the soft power that we are seeing from Russia through these new vistas, which are critical in the pathway of Africa's quest for development, is critical. And one hopes that we define in Africa what we want, so that that relationship is a relationship that is going to be mutually beneficial. And as I've said, not once, not twice, but times without number, the reason why Russia becomes attractive is because she was not a colonizer. The reason why she's attractive is because she's coming on the table not in a condescending way. The reason why Russia is attractive is because she's saying we are prepared to transfer technology. The reason why she's attractive is because she's saying we are prepared to train your young men and women to the extent that we can. The reason why they are attractive because they are saying we are going to do it differently. We are going to do it in a manner that is respectful of the continent of Africa. The burden is now on Africans. If you don't define what you want, even the best intentioned of countries will take advantage of you. So Africans, let us organize. We have Africa Agenda 2063. We have Africa Continental Free Trade Area. How are we going to leverage all those so that when we are engaging Russia and other friends of goodwill, we do it in a manner that is going to be beneficial to both sides of the equation? It can be done, it must be done, and this is the opportunity. And if Russians have demonstrated, as they have, that they are friends of goodwill, they will find welcoming hands in the continent of Africa. Thank you very much. We continue with our discussion about diverse issues on the continent of Africa, and we say bye-byes in the knowledge that we'll come back again to continue those critical and useful conversations about the continent of Africa. Thank you very much.